Welcome to everyone who is nobody's online yet, but we have many of us here. And this is the last week of progressive Christianity and what's new. And Nancy and I found this book. Did you find it, I think? And tell me about it, or
I mean, there's two of these, which is really
there's
good
a
because this is the first one, and then there's another one that has more stories.
right, how to heal our divides. And we're gonna talk about it in a little bit, but there's kind of a long video, so I thought we'd get started with the video. So we go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Nobody's online.
Lovely
What's
morning.
with those online?
I don't know.
Who's Jack's here?
Well, yeah, he's usually on one. I don't see Karen now.
You know what?
Yeah, usually we wait for
Karen
Karen
now.
now.
It's because you have a new baby. You know what she said?
They're great grandparents now. I saw it on Instagram
Who?
or Facebook.
Urban now.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I saw it on
To the
Instagram.
book.
Okay, let's get started.
So my name is Brian Elaine, and I compiled a book and a platform called How to Heal Our Divides. And these wonderful people that you see in front of us all contributed to the book, either themselves individually or their organizations. And the focus of the book is on organizations and individuals that are actually doing something to heal different types of divides. As I was doing lots of reading last year during the pandemic, I was a little bit frustrated because I was reading a lot of great books about anti-racism, about political and religious kinds of divides, and all great books about things like, here's the history behind it, or look inside yourself to examine your own, biases. Really good things, but I kept looking for an answer to the question, so what do we do about it? And I didn't find much written about very practical things going on. And so these people helped me construct a book about that very topic. So How to Heal Our Divides has got 33 chapters, each written by a different person. And they deal with organizations and people who are actually taking practical steps. So racial healing, how to have better arguments, discussion forums from a political or religious standpoint, things like that. And so we're here to talk about the book and about the platform. It's an ongoing platform beyond just that first book. I wish I could tell you to go over to the bookshop and buy a copy, but we've already sold out. So, but if you have the bookmark, on the back of it is a QR code that you can take a look at with your camera and get to the website and order the book. So, in any event, here with us we have Doug Padgett, Jeff Burns, Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons, Alexis Salvatierra, and Brian McLaren. Again, all incredible people who, participated in this. So, yes, please give them a round of hand. They deserve it.
Okay, we're gonna jump ahead.
Can everybody hear okay?
I did. Is there audio setting on the big screen as well?
No, it's.
I think right there, Dory, see the one that's 3 over the little audio? See where the arrow is and then the audio there.
That's mute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it won't help us. I'll see if this one.
If each of you could, like, for those of the folks that haven't read the book, share with folks what you wrote about, or in your case, what the chapter was about, Doug.
Yeah, I'll be glad to go first. In our case, we traveled the country in a bus and went into districts and asked religious voters to behave differently in the 2020 election and the 2018 election than they may have in the past. So we traveled around like a bunch of traveling evangelists trying to get Republicans to take an invitation to behave differently. And one of the people that traveled with us, her name is Vanessa Ryerson, and she's a pastor in Arkansas. And she told her own story that I think is titled A Tale of Two Buses. And she talked about why she was on this bus and how women were thrown under the bus, in her language, by the religious community of her past, supporting someone who, while sitting on a bus, bragged about assaulting women. And she said, they told me they would keep us safe from these predators. And so she took a version of her talk that she gave all over the country and did this talk in very brave places. One time we were with Brian in Florida, and there was a line of 75 Proud Boys and others with armed trucks and everything, honking and disrupting, and she stood up and told her story, and she did this from state to state and place to place, and she takes that story and talks about why it was important for her to stand up and how her being at the border after the murders that happened in the Walmart in El Paso had motivated her, because on that very same day that those murders happened, which was inspired by the kind of radicalism that was just spoken about, she was shopping at Walmart in Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas, with her children. And had she been in El Paso, her daughter, who has the skin color of the people who were targeted and killed, would have likely been one of those people that were targeted. So this became a personal story of her own effect and her own trauma of the tale of these buses and how people got there. So this book is not just full of like sort of theories of anecdotes of how you can get there. It's people's real stories, and I'm very proud that for the Vote Common Good contribution, Vanessa Ryersey's story is included there.
Absolutely. Jeff?
Yes, I wrote a chapter on the peace model that I created. And in 2005, just to give you just a short context, I just resigned the pastorate. I've been a pastor for 18 years, pastoring Baptist and charismatic churches. And I was a strong Christian Zionist. You know that term, Christian Zionism? It's the belief that Jesus can't return until all the Arabs are out of the territories. And for Jesus to come back. And I was a strong advocate from the pulpit. I was so far right, I pooped marble. Okay, I mean that's how tight I was, And I remember, I took a class reluctantly for 3 months on understanding Islam. And my view changed a lot. And I remember one day I was in a Starbucks on Creedmoor Road in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was going through a real kind of identity crisis over this. I said, oh my gosh, what if I'm wrong? I used to say awful things about Muslims from the pulpits. My pulpits and places, I was right in the middle of that. And I prayed for God to give me a sign. I said, okay, God, here's the deal. If you're calling me to build bridges of love to the house of Ishmael, you're going to have to give me a sign so clear I'll never doubt it, because it will cost me everything. And in a few minutes, this little Muslim boy came over named Omar. And I won't go into all the details, but that day, God transformed my heart. He took all the hate out of my heart. He said, I'm here to teach you Arabic. I'd pray for a sign. God, give me a sign. This little Muslim boy walks over. I'm here to teach you Arabic. And so for 20 minutes, Omar tried, and all that hate was gone, and love for Muslims came. It was really supernatural. And so I walked out of and that story's been told. I have a YouTube channel 300,000 times, plus not including magazines and I've told it for Heads of State and Sudan and other places. And God's used it. You know what I mean? I went from being a hateful Islamophobe to this. And so I left the Starbucks and I said, okay, God, I'm in all the way. That's how I do. I'm either all in or all, it's just the way I'm wired. And I said, I don't know how to do this thing about peace. I don't know what I'm doing. Now, at that time, I'm not saying I can't say dogmatically there were no, in America, evangelicals doing bridge work with Muslims. I couldn't find them. And most of the ones I know now, I trained them. I'm not saying to brag, but I did. I did a lot of training. And so I was going out here doing this, and everybody thinks you're an expert if you're the only one doing it. And there's an old saying, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man's king, So so I went to churches and told them how to host Muslims, and say, you got to have halal food or kosher food. I had to educate them just to break that barrier down. And to kind of make a long story short on this, I started noticing, wow, something's happening here. We're getting people together. We're seeing walls come down. We're seeing, next thing you know, you move beyond you're in, you're out. You begin to say, they look at you and say, you're a true Christ follower. That was the one thing we began to notice. So I started struggling. What am I doing? So it was McCall. I mentored her. She goes, you got to write down in some form what you do. So she helped me do that. And I came up with the Peace Path model. And the Peace Path model it's free. You can download it for 60 pages. I've got a book about it I want to publish one day. I already have it written. And that thing's been going all over the world. I've had Muslim people write me and say, we were going to kill the Christians in our village, but after reading your book, we decided we're not going to do it. We heard, Omar, if you can change, anybody can change, And I've had people that hated Jews say, after this, we decided to go make peace with our Jewish neighbor. And I've had radicals, I've had jihadists write me. I had one of them want to kill me, but the other two were nice. And, about it. So anyway, long story short, I came with this model, and I said, and honestly, after 19 years of theological training, and I'm not saying to brag, but it all, like Bonhoeffer says, not Bonhoeffer, but Karl Barth, what's the greatest truth you've ever learned? They asked him, he says, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I sit down, I said, what am I doing? What's my message? And I sat down and looked at it, and I said, after all this training, in the end, my core message is to love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, treat other people the way you want to be treated, and if you find enemies along the way, do everything within your power to make them your friends. And then I said, well, that sounds good, but we got to have some practices. So we came up and with these 4 practices. Become friends, authentic friends without a hook. The second one is to eat together. It's hard to eat with an enemy. It really is. If somebody hates you, you have a family member that hates you, it's hard to eat with them, right? Come together, eat together. And I would tell our Muslims, dialogue's great, friends, but until our children are playing together and we're eating in each other's home, we're just having a nice talk. And the third thing is explore faith together without being assholes. In other words, let's really learn from each other. And then the fourth thing is let's go out and do something for the common good. We built Habitat homes, we did all this stuff. So that's what I wrote about my mom in here. And then I have a testimonial from a guy I met in Indonesia. He's taking this thing and he's got all over Sydney and places, the world, all these groups formed, and I can't take credit for it. Then I've got Muslims who are saying, hey, we're using your model, and we consider you our priest. And it's just, so that's what I contributed. But it boils down to, and one thing I love about this book is our practices are very similar. They're very similar.
There's a lot of common threads, between, even though they're completely different subjects necessarily.
Yeah.
So Guthrie, tell us a little bit about what you wrote, but also, if you could, about your book and about the work that you do.
Sure, thanks. I wrote about the asymmetry of faith and politics in the United States. And we live in a beautifully diverse nation with lots of different religious motivations. And yet, I think as a culture, we overemphasize the role of religion on the right that plays into conservative politics, while de-emphasizing the secular motivations of the right, namely the NRA, and the big corporations. There's a lot of secular right we never talk about. And then we underemphasize the role of religion on the left. And people on the left do this, both religious and secular. And there are a lot of reasons for this asymmetry. The right's louder. Westboro Baptist Church gets the most news per member of their church of any church in this country. The left, doesn't want to wear faith on our sleeve because it can seem as, overly pious or sort of being exclusive to talk about your faith in a pluralistic context. And there's so many different reasons for this asymmetry. And I know that I'm one person and I want to make a single contribution, which is doing everything I can to empower, organize, and rally progressive people of faith to know that we are not alone, to know that there are so many of us, millions upon millions of us, that there has never been a progressive movement in this country that wasn't full of people of faith. There isn't today and there never will be. And that we have our place, and that this continual obsession with the religious right and the kind of ignoring and erasing the religious left is one of the key kind of divides in our entire country. And the way I'm doing it in terms of the concrete actions, which I love about your book, Brian, is through a few things. I started a newsletter right after Trump got elected called The Resistance Prays. We saw all of these resistance efforts, and I saw everyone taking like Bible verses and putting them on their signs, whether it was the Muslim ban protests at the airports or the Women's March. And yet I didn't see a spiritual resource. So we published every day throughout the entire Trump administration, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we continue to publish now. I'm now a fellow at the Center for American Progress with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative, which a lot of people don't know exists, because it's a secular organization. But so many secular organizations are doing a lot of faith outreach. And I think there are many different ways those of us on the stage and everyone in the book and everyone here at Wild Goose is trying to make a difference. But if we can just I think we lower the tension on the right when they don't think it's the right versus the secular, godless left. That lowers the temperature. And also, everywhere I go around the country, and I wrote about this in the book, Just Faith, Reclaiming Progressive Christianity, people are so dismayed at seeing their faith co-opted and distorted, and they're not looking around at in every major city and most smaller towns in this country, there's a group of Jesus followers living out the gospel in ways I think we would all agree with. Let's organize and talk to each other for once.
Woohoo! Amen.
I'm glad I got to write this.
Amen.
Available in the book tent.
Yes. And it's a wonderful book. I quoted many excerpts from it across my platform. So in any event, Alexia, tell us about what you wrote about.
I'm just going to tell a story. So in Costa Mesa, Orange County, California, one of the first cities in the world, not in the world, one of the first cities in the United States where they called upon immigration enforcement and the local sheriff to work together. So just so that you know how conservative that is, most people think California doesn't have conservative places. Costa Mesa. So we were dealing with an incredibly hot divide around immigration, even though this was a decade ago. And so what we did is we did a pastor's prayer breakfast where we brought immigrant pastors and white pastors, some of whom, almost all of them evangelical, together, to pray and to share about their greatest pastoral concerns. Not to talk about politics, to share about their greatest pastoral concerns. But of course, for the immigrant pastors, they had to talk about families being separated by deportation. That's the pastoral concern that they were dealing with every day. And so one of the white pastors got up in the middle of this and said, because there was a very powerful stunned silence, as you might imagine, especially when one of the immigrant pastors of a megachurch stood up and said, I came to this country undocumented. There were 10 people in my church and now there are 3,000. So there was this really stunned moment. But one of the white pastors gets up in the middle of that and he says, I tried to preach on immigration once, biblically, and I lost 300 families. I'm just too scared. And the immigrant pastors were like, you're scared to talk, you should experience fear. But then Juan Martinez, who at the time was in the position I now hold at Fuller, stood up and said, why are people who believe in carrying the cross being controlled by fear? Whoa. And everybody stopped. It was a moment. And so then we began talking about, okay, so we share common pastoral concerns, and that common sacred ground brings us together. But what about our congregations? So we began to talk about how do we engage our congregations in joint mission in a way that will enable them to trust each other. So there was a children's detention center. This was before the surge at the border. There was a children's detention center. And of course, we all do prison ministry, right? I mean, all churches do prison ministry. So what we did is we got immigrant and non-immigrant church volunteers together to go visit the kids, to play soccer with them, to bake with them, to do vacation Bible school. And in the process, we began to develop relationships. We also were able to do some training, right? About the history of immigration, about the scripture, what does the word say? Because we were being trained to visit kids in prison. Well, we had a whole plan in mind about how we were going to then gradually move back into the churches. But one of the chair of the church council at Mariners, which has 20,000 members, most of them white Republican, happened to be part of the group. And he had heard his partner, who came from immigrant church, share with him about the deportation of his sister. And he trusted his partner, right? Because they had been working together in joint mission. Well, he goes storming into the office of the senior pastor and he says, we have to study this. The church is involved. The church needs to be involved. We need to respond to what the Lord is calling us to. The senior pastor, of course, was like, but this man was the chair of the board, major donor. So, you know, that led to a book study, which then I'm not going to go into the rest of it. Some of it's in the book. But united in joint mission. Stop there.
Yay. Isn't that a great story? I mean, if we couldn't have more churches across the country doing similar kinds of things, I can't think of much else better that we could be doing. So thank you, Alexia, for sharing all that in the book. Now, Brian's chapter was kind of an introduction, to the book. And so, Brian, you want to share a little bit about what you talked about?
Well, really, my job was just to make people want to listen to these other people. So you can see I had an easy job. But maybe I'll just throw one additional thought out there. And that is that when we talk about healing our divides, we have to understand that there are other people out there trying to accentuate divides and increase divides. They make money over divides. They gain power over divides. One of the greatest shortcuts to power is to create an enemy them. The enemy doesn't even need to exist. All you need to do is scare people that an enemy exists, and then you say, I alone can fix it, or something like that, and then you gain the power of people that you've succeeded in making afraid. And one of the terrible problems is that when people are prospering by dividing people, and you come along as a peacemaker, they don't see you as a friend, they see you as an enemy. You think being a peacemaker would put you in a peaceful position. It doesn't. It very often puts you in a highly dangerous position. And a huge part of, it seems to me, the value of this book and of these stories you're hearing is you're realizing it took courage for each of these people to try to say something different and to go across the road to make a connection with someone else. And I think one of our hopes is that that courage will become contagious. Because as you said, people who claim to be people of the cross, who are controlled by fear, you realize, yeah, something's a little out of whack there. And the call to courage is, to me, one of the great messages of this book.
Okay.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, the video itself is a lot longer. Oops, let's
So we
see.
have lots of online friends.
Yeah, the whole video is a lot longer. and Nancy and I debated it for a long time, how much we were gonna, because there's way more to it, as you can imagine. But Nancy and I both came up with well, you did, one of the chapters in particular that's really good for discussion.
So we have questions, but what I almost like to see first is, what do people think about some of those stories? What were the observations that you had from the stories? Because they were all very different and very rich storytellers in their own way, from the pastor who was very anti-Islam and then was converted in the coffee store, to do this work all over the world, to just the woman who was talking about just the impact of immigration on the churches in that Costa Mesa County.
But my observation is God is in every single one of those stories, and he's the one that was transforming. He's trying to help the world too, with these people.
Yeah.
Because they heard the message.
So it seemed like when they encountered each other across the divide was kind of the beginning of progress, of healing. It became no longer a fear of them, it became more of us. Was being a mission project, we can be together with friends. Really smart lesson for us.
There's one essay in the book about disabilities, people with disabilities as well,
Okay.
and what people are trying to talk about healing divide and how they do it.
That's the outside appearance.
I was gonna share that there's one of the chapters in this book, they have a way of working with people in small groups, and they started out But now these practices are all over the world, and they call it the 3 practices. And it was a little bit like what you were saying, Jack, first, that one of the things is when they have people getting together and there's disagreement or, even very vocal disagreement about things. The first thing is that people have a curiosity, so they want to know more. So they ask that question, I'm curious, I'd like to know a little bit more. And that's really the first practice. So let's say the beginning, Kim, really is God is there, the Holy Spirit is there to bring people into the curiosity.
Yeah.
But they talk about, I'd like to know a little bit more, and they actually are genuinely curious to understand, not to convince someone, but to really understand their point of view. And then one of the other things they do is they sit with the difference in the room with someone else. And so they're willing to actually attend with the other person to have that conversation and listen to them. And out of that curiosity, both listen to each other. And then the third part of that is that they don't compare their best stories with the other person's worst stories. And I think it's really easy. I know I do that in my own mind too, or when I'm watching something on TV, I'm always comparing, my best version of my beliefs to someone else's worst. And maybe there's something in thinking about, what is the best version of how we all come together, and then we find some communication.
That is interesting. That chapter was interesting to me too, because those people actually started in Seattle. And they have something called 3 practices, and then those are the 3 that you just said. Be unusually curious, stay in the room with the differences, and don't compare the best of yourself with the worst of them. And it started with an imam, a pastor, and a rabbi. They called it no joke. Like they walked into and they walked into a room and started talking to each other. And when you think, especially about religion, you think about, oh, what's the worst thing that Muslims do versus my version of the best thing that Christians do, right? It's so easy to go there. Or you say, well, the best that Muslims do, but they don't always do that. Well, the best that Christians do, we don't always do that either. So they were using that as an example of the best and worst in someone else. So true.
Well, we can even just think about in Christianity, if we're looking across the spectrum of different beliefs that are either more progressive or more conservative, it's really easy for both and across that spectrum to compare what's our best with their worst.
Right, the best of progressive Christianity and the worst of conservative Christianity. Well, he's saying don't start with that.
Maybe start with God is present in the room with everyone.
God is still speaking.
You know what this book is?
No, I don't. I'd like to.
We missed the beginning. I'm sorry.
Alan Carroll.
Hi, Alan Carroll.
We can hear you. I'm glad you're here. It's a very interesting video we just watched. Al? Oh, now you're muted.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, I'm reminded of what we were doing as a church 10 years ago when Jim Patton was still with us, with the Muslim people, the meetings we had, the dinners we had together, the things that we shared, and went on for some time. But after Jim retired and we were in, I'll say, a literal state of limbo, not much happened, and that whole thing dropped. And I think that was a very valuable way for us as a congregation to see the various Muslim churches around us, and they weren't so much different from us, really. It was very revealing. Enough said.
I was just going to add that one major exception to that is last June, our Mikaf lecture, instead of having a lecture, we had Eat with Muslims. And we had a speaker who was a Muslim woman from Somalia who came and spoke, but then more importantly, she invited a bunch of her friends and we had lunch together, and every single table had Muslim women at it, almost all women, I think, at that time. And it was just the most amazing conversation. It reminded me of that time with Jim Patton, and this was very much in that same vein. And I just sitting in the room and getting to talk to people, several of the ones here say, if you have a meal with somebody, it's kind of hard to hate them. And a lot of, and there was great, even though it was just coming out of the pandemic, we had great attendance at that event. So we have still done some things. Marianne.
Well, I was there, and what impressed me was, as soon as we sat down, the two women at the table where I was sitting said, ask anything. There's no question that's off the table. Ask us anything you want. It could be, and so there was this open invitation. So we got into all kinds of things at our table. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And their overt openness, an invitation to us to ask anything, really helped it a lot.
They're kind of using the practices actually.
Yeah, the practice is like curiosity. I think we were all very curious. Who is this woman who just sat down? Many of them were Somali, some of them were one of them was US born, so they're not all, but they were all women. So Muslim women, you think, oh, well, they're oppressed and they can't say what they think. And they came and they sat with us and they answered their questions. I thought it was such a good feeling. Everybody left with a good feeling, including the Muslim women.
They had those practices going on.
They did. And that's a Seattle one here.
Yeah, I don't know if I was at your table, Marianne, but they said the same thing at my table. And so we went to the heart of, when you talk about the worst of the other people's religions, some of that you went to right away. And, but it's that whole, the step that we always miss is that next step, which Lynn has made, but is that true beginning of friendship. When we had something with Jim years ago, one of those dinners, and the group at our table that was a mixed group, we decided, well, the only way to move forward was to continue us. And so we had another dinner at one of the people's houses, and then the pandemic came and it all fell apart. But that was the thing. Well, we've got to meet regularly enough that we really truly get to know each other, and nobody, has taken up the mantle, because if you don't have a Muslim next door neighbor or or something, you don't have those opportunities. I was also curious, in the book, does it ever talk about how to deal with the non-religious people? Healing the divide, because that's what we here deal with a lot, is all the people that, just have nothing good to say about religion, and it's only done bad things in the world,
There is not a chapter about that, but I think these three practices would work for any kind of difference. And Nancy has some questions about those.
So let me just ask a few questions to move the discussion more for what we can think about and do. So are there people with whom you want or need to stay connected, but honestly held differences threaten that connection or threaten to separate you permanently? And what have you done to try to maintain or patch those relationships?
Well, I can only say that's with my family.
Everybody should speak up a little, because it's very hard to hear.
Were you able to hear the question, Marianne?
You have it yourself.
I think the only thing I can think of right now is my family, because of their differences in politics. It's always threatening it, and I just have learned not to say anything because I don't really want to lose my family either. But I always wish I have this desire to be able to discuss things with them, but haven't ever figured out how to do that. So I just don't say anything. I hear them saying lots of things, but I I don't say anything, because my family doesn't know how to do dialogue, they only know how to, they're right. It's either right or wrong. You know, they have that binary thinking, so it's hard, but so far, I'm just keep my mouth shut and I just try not to do, you know, but that's not that fulfilling really, but that's the only practice I know how to do. Maybe I'll have to read the book so I can figure out some more practice.
But maybe that's,
Yeah,
thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah,
Because I understand that in situations, sometimes it's
Yeah.
easier to just be there to have the relationship, but not to further some kind of dialogue, but
yeah.
do,
You know,
do
trying to
people
talk
have
about-
experience with how to move some of that, move past some of that, or without blowing it up?
I'm really struggling with this right now, so thank you, Kim, for bringing it up. Because I have a family member who, and I have been the mitigating, person in the family, the one always saying, let's let him have the opportunity to do the right thing. And sometimes that has worked. But I have to say that I am getting to be the person who cannot deal with him anymore. I don't have all my trips, I mean, we both love God, what are our commonalities, quiet, reprimands. Well, I don't think that your black neighbor's that different from you. You both like dog, all of the racism and the misogyny and everything that comes out. And I actually hit a wall. So it's listening to this, I'm thinking, you get so exhausted, and I haven't seen, I've seen some change, I guess, but not a lot. And I'm exhausted. So I'm ready to blow it up. So maybe I didn't appreciate sharing.
Well, I have to say, I pray a lot about it. I do a lot of prayers. I'm like, God, guide me. What I try to figure out what can I do, but maybe I just have to let it go and let him figure out something. Because every once in a while, there is a little opening.
And I have not as extreme, but similar things where I have, like last week, there was some ruling on the estate tax, right? There was some court ruling on the Washington State, I think, estate tax, and a relative sent me the article. They sent a bunch of us the article, and all about these communists getting away with murder again. But there's not an opening to say, that it's about that there's a value difference and why, why I don't get as upset about that as you. I mean, we all like to keep our own money. We've all worked hard for it, but there's never an opening, and they're always sort of flippant remarks too. They're kind of a joke, and it's really hard to respond to something that's placed in the kind of a joke, phrase with stuff. I mean, I often get teased about my left-wing communist beliefs and stuff, so.
I don't know where they come up with.
And I don't even think I think I'm pretty moderate, to be honest. I mean, I'm not very left-wing.
I know.
That's the thing.
So I find it difficult when they come up with this thing, they're communists or they're whatever, or
Name calling.
the name calling, like, how did you, or a dictator, or I'm just like, where are you getting at all this stuff? I'm thinking, well, we do have a problem with that maybe, but maybe it's not what you're thinking it is or something, I don't know. Like, it's just one, it's like, it just encompasses everything, because I hear stuff like that from my two sisters all the time. I'm like, whoa, okay. Like, it's stunning. It's like, it just throws you off. It's like, where are you coming from, Because they're not explaining, they're just name calling, right?
Yeah. So what if we took it to whether it's secular groups in the community or other religious groups? How do we have those conversations where there's differences, but there would be opportunities to work together for the common good? Because I think that's really, we've already described, I think we all know it's difficult in our own families if we're trying to do that and trying to keep the peace. But for for those opportunities to work in the community with different, either religious or secular organizations. You know,
It feels
what are
like-
ways we can do that?
I don't really have the ways, but I think that we aren't really trying very hard. The conservative side of Christianity, we get together with them. Because maybe that's something we really need to work on, because we're working well with the Muslims and we're trying to do all that stuff, but we're like staying away from, that could be very controversial. We don't even practice on that side.
It seems like it's a challenging conversation to react to something that is so far in the wrong direction from our perspective. But it seems like if we could be prepared to sort of move to a point of common interest, a point of commonality, as a response to something that's far away, way far to one side or the other, and bring the conversation to an issue of common agreement, and maybe that kind of softens it enough that you can kind of stay in dialogue a little bit. I don't exactly know how to do that, but something like that could work if we sort of were somewhat prepared with an awareness of those areas of common interest. And that comes, I guess, back to come together to understand where the points of common interest are.
One issue that I have had a real problem with is extended family members is during COVID, when they opted not to be vaccinated. And I thought that was so mean spirited of them. They were thinking of themselves, but they weren't thinking of the common good. Which was, so that was the biggest barrier for me to try to figure out how to agree with that.
Not to agree, but how to even talk to somebody who
Right.
says that.
Like my family members are telling me, stop taking those shots, you're going to kill yourself. And I'm just like, you don't really say anything, and you just kind of say, well, it's already too late, I've done it. So fine, that's what I'm doing. Let's see if I die of a heart attack like you said I was supposed to. I said, I'm gonna be okay. But that's how my sister is. He's always, they're both telling me that. What about your health? And I'm like, well,
Your health.
yeah. I know, but that's just the thing. It's like, how do they come to these conclusions?
That's part of the divide.
That's part of the
But
divide.
that's what I wonder about this advice too, so to be curious about them and open to them, and if it's family, yes, you're open to them. But you're curious, and then you get a harangue,
Yes, you do.
and then which it might include name calling,
Yes.
and then what do? I'm curious to know why you think such a stupid, ridiculous thing.
Several ways to ask the question. And one of them was really not even I would like, or I'm curious, that I just like to know. Like, just it's very disarming. But then part of it is the intent, to go in and be truly curious.
It's hard.
And not
hard.
I'm trying to understand.
Yes.
But, so do any of you know someone who's unusually interested in others, or good at this being curious in a way that opens the dialogue?
Well, I'd say you right now.
I mean, I always think of Lynn.
Yes, Lynn's good. You are. Yeah. Well, that's what I know. I mean, and Lynn's, I'm always admiring her.
I mean, I always think about when I was just a pretty new member in the church, and Gary Schwab would do like an ACE class, and he would have all these individuals with differing opinions and how he could hold that space. And I just watched, what was it about the way his demeanor, the way he listened, the way he asked questions, where he made room for the differences. And, I guess still trying to figure some of that out, because he was so good at doing that, where, we'd have a dialogue about something and people would disagree, and he could tease out why people had that thought and how there were interconnections. And
Yeah, that's true. That was amazing. Yeah.
Are there any answers in those 3 practices for that? How can you be like that?
well,
It takes a lot of practice.
Especially when they're so wrong.
you have, I think the second practice is you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort and sit with the disagreement and with the divide and be okay that that exists and acknowledge it. And that's really hard to do because it's our natural way of being and affinity to want to be in a group of like-minded people that support each other.
It makes it easier.
Or argue with them and try to bring them to your side,
Yeah.
which doesn't work.
You can't change people's minds.
That's when I was taking all the coaching classes at work, that was the main thing, was to not have an answer. Don't have an answer, do not have a response, don't even think about what you're gonna say, but it's just the listening and listening to them, and and that's really hard to do, is to not, because yes, I do want you to change your mind. I do want you to, but not have an answer and just, like you say, just sit in it and let them come to their own kind of conclusion.
Back to your first point of being willing to learn without challenging.
Yeah.
And for the person you're listening to have that feeling that you're willing to listen, but you're not there to challenge them. I think then the other side is more open to share the genuine, what they feel is their genuine reasons for their thoughts, for their opinions.
Because I'm thinking about, what you said about Gary Schwab. I mean, he had reached a point where he had God consciousness and he knew that God loved everyone. He wasn't saying, well, God doesn't love this person because they act this way or this way. He had figured it out that he knew God loved everyone, and I'm sure he had practiced quite a bit. I'm sure he didn't start off that way, right?
I mean, I even remember kind of part of the overview of that one talk he gave. It was talking about there's different paths up the mountain.
Yes.
And these
Correct.
different groups are taking
I
these
love
different
that one,
paths. And there's a lot of things that we have in common on that journey. And there's also things that we have that are very different.
I remember saying that very thing to an evangelical Christian who said, well, I believe there's only one path up the mountain. I've heard that. It's not true. There's only one path. And then where do you go from there?
You just sit with it.
Well, when I sit over here, I see the other trail. Oh, no.
That's the wrong way. That's not the way. It's not.
We'll see you at the top and see.
Okay. We'll see you guys. That's a good one, Chris.
So how do we, what are things we can do then to cultivate that ability to stay in the room? Because I think that's the hard part. I mean, that's what's come out in some of this discussion, is the ability to just stay in the room with the differences. And yeah, Lynn.
Well, I think one thing might be to go to a gathering of people who are really different from you. I have really been enjoying going to some workshops put on by very conservative Christian groups. And I know that I'm in a minority, and I know that I'm not going to change them all. And I just listen to them, and then when I get an opportunity to talk with some of them, I do that, and I see that they're people just like me, but they have very different ideas. But every year I've been going to one that's called an apologetics conference, and I always wondered, what do we have to apologize for? And then I learned that it's not really apologizing, it's defending your faith.
Oh, that's a tricky way to put it.
Right, but I really like those people, and I enjoy sitting in on the workshops, and every now and then, if I have a chance to say something, I say something. I don't make any difference, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people there with ideas different from mine. But I find it a good exercise. I think it strengthens me a bit.
And you've been practicing.
And it has, it has encouraged me on my faith journey here a lot by going among some of the other people. And some of them, I've made some new friends. And so I think engaging with other is important and helpful.
Yeah, so I was curious, the mosaics really don't have the same philosophies or theology as we do.
The church that meets downstairs.
Yeah, because they are not for the LGBT or inclusion. They're not inclusion. And I think it'd be nice if we had more meals with them together to become curious.
I'm curious why. I don't believe that.
Well, and I wonder if part of what happens as we are in the room, we're curious, we stick with the discomfort of it. And if it's repeated, then trust is built. And I just think about one of the relationships I have with someone at work who's conservative evangelical Christian. But we're able to, one, we have a really good working relationship, but we also are able to talk about religion. And it started out with the individual telling me more about, well, it needs to be this way. But over time, I think some of the trust that built was that we both know that each other loves God and wants to try to be the best that we could be, even though it's, it's a daily challenge, right?
Yeah.
And try to do the right thing. And that it's difficult because that doesn't override the fact that someone is in a position where they're denying someone their own well-being.
Yeah.
By not being both welcoming but affirming. Or whether it's
and they're
LGBTQI
rejecting another human being.
Yeah. But it's like,
so you can't change.
how you balance all of that,
It's
because
tough. But that was just another thought. I mean, they have a totally different view of things.
Is there any idea of having any kind of discussion with the Mosaic people?
I don't know,
but
it's just a thought I had, because they're down in our,
it's a good
they're
idea.
in our basement, right?
I think that would be an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we had it for the summer thing, but I don't know how many people talk.
I talked quite a bit to several of the Mosaic people, but I didn't talk theology.
No, but it takes time to figure that one out, wouldn't it? But at least you'd come together and.
It might be good to just start with having a meal together and not talking theology. And getting to know them as people.
As people first,
And for them to get to know us as people.
Right, and when we prepare this gathering, do we tell people we're not gonna talk about our faith?
Well, I don't know, we did.
Or do like the Muslim women did,
Yeah.
and just say
Anything's on the table.
anything's on
Ask
the
us
table.
about progressive Christianity, we'll talk to you.
Yeah.
Like they said, ask us about Islam.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time? Oh.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Okay.
Talk about next week.
Oh, okay. All right, well, this is the last class in this series on new voices in progressive Christianity. And if anybody wants to borrow this, I've got one with lots of sticky notes in it. And next week, has Lois left? Lois has left. Lois is going to lead us in a class on bathrooms.
Oh,
Gender neutral bathrooms and a little bit of history and trying to understand what that all is all about. So that's going to be the last ACE class until the fall.
Okay.
So 9 to 10, you're free for the rest of after next week until the fall. And, but we have one more class, so looking forward to that and hoping everybody can come.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today.